So, friends, our weekly Bible reflection time. Thank you for joining us. And thanks also to my guest, including today, I have with me Sarah Sumner. Sarah, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for asking me.
You and I have known each other, good grief, a very long time.
A very long time.
I think I probably met you before I met Lisa back in the day. You worked at Myers. How long did you work at Myers Park Church?
30 years.
Lord have mercy.
Hmm.
And you retired as the director of children's ministries.
Yes,
That
sir.
was a great job for you because you're good with children, you're good with parents, you have a good vision for children and their faith development and everything else. So you were a great colleague. So we're grateful for that. And you're a Sumner. And when I got to know you, I realized your husband was a brother to one of my dear friends who was my neighbor up in Davidson, John, and he's died since then. But
Yes.
great family. Anyhow. So, Sarah, thanks for joining us. The question we've been asking folks is what in the Bible has been mattering to you lately and why?
Well, I think it's interesting when you asked because if you had probably asked 2 or 3 weeks earlier, I maybe would have had a different answer. Uh, we've had we've had a lot of neat things going on in our family the past few weeks. One being my granddaughter's graduation from high school, and I think the part of the Bible that I was focused on during all that celebration was Psalm 139.
Mm.
Uh, Julia is venturing off into a world that we don't know a whole lot about. She has joined the United States Marine Corps.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow, I was right.
Hmm.
And uh, I have spent a lot of time in discussion with God about the Marines. So, uh, Psalm 139 has given me a lot of comfort, and I hope it will give Julia a lot of comfort as she ventures into what is going to be truly an unknown world for her, too.
Hmm.
And one of the things I gave her for graduation was Dr. Seuss's book, Oh, the Places You'll Go.
There we are.
But I put when I wrote a little note in the beginning, I said, even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. And you have you hem me in, behind, and before, and lay your hand upon me. And I hope that that brings Julia a lot of comfort, and it brings me a lot of comfort as I hand her over to Lord knows who at Paris Island in 2 months. So that that psalm has brought me comfort, and ever since we talked about psalms a couple of years ago, I've really found myself going to them more and more. Um, they they really speak to me more than I think they did for a lot of years.
I think, I studied Psalms when I was doing my doctoral work. And one of the things that we would say to people back then was the more you read and pray the Psalms, the more you read and pray the Psalms, right? So
Right.
you kind of get the hang of it and it becomes more and more meaningful. And I think about St. Augustine on his deathbed. He asked that they print out Psalms in great big letters and hang it, around his bed when he couldn't get up anymore. I mean, I love that. And that one that Psalm, there's so much in it. Like, where can I flee from your spirit? If
Right.
it's the dawn, it has the like spatial distance, and then it has the, Lord, you knew me when I was in my mother's womb. That's got to be meaningful for you in this case because your child's child, it's a beautiful thing. And what I love that you did there, Sarah, by the way, I want to be sure people notice this, is you didn't just ask, what does this psalm mean for me? God is with me. But what does the psalm mean for someone that I love, that God isn't just with me in their absence, but God is with her wherever she goes. And that in turn brings comfort and hope and such to me. Hmm.
It does. That's the psalm that we use when we do Wonderfully Made with the fifth graders,
Yeah.
that's where we got the title for that day of pure agony with fifth graders and their parents as we talk about human sexuality for a whole day. But we are fearfully and wonderfully made, and the changes that are happening in our bodies are happening because God has created us that way. And so it has truly become one of my favorite psalms.
And all the bodies, right? Our society looks at tall, sleek, whatever bodies.
Mm-hmm.
But theologically, it's all the bodies. It's Paul says your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. He doesn't mean like the good-looking ones, the one with a fair complexion and great hair or whatever. It's your body. That body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. I love that.
Right. It is. So.
Well, Sarah, thank you for this, and I hope everybody will go out and grab their Bible and not just like read Psalm 139 like a
Psalm
novel.
139.
You don't read it quickly, right? You read it slowly. It's the kind of thing you read a verse, you read it again, you ponder it, then you go to the next, and you go back. It's beautiful. One of the Bible's very greatest texts. So, Sarah, thank you so much for sharing that and for your life and ministry and your friendship. We're grateful.
Thank you.
So, welcome, Sydnor Thompson. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Where are you today?
I'm in Weaverville, just north of Asheville.
Weaverville, outside Asheville. That's great. Thank you for it. And I thought about this yesterday. I was on my bicycle and I was riding down Brandon, and I passed maybe your childhood home, but where your parents lived. Did you grow up in that house?
Yes, they lived there, and I lived there with them. They moved finally shortly before. Well, Mom was battling cancer, so it was probably in the early 2000s that they moved.
Yeah, so you and I have known each other since seminary. I did not know at the time the quality of your gene pool. I met your dad as a young pastor and worked with him in Mecklenburg Ministries and other committees. I mean, I was always wowed by his wisdom and intelligence and commitment to do good for the world. And then, good grief, met your mother, I remember she was doing a piano concert over at Queens, and with just great verve, she said, "My teacher was so and so, his teacher was so and so, his teacher was so and so, his teacher was Frederick Chopin." And then, of course, viewers may remember this. She was famous late in life as a marathoner in her 90s.
I do remember that. I ran a few of those with her.
Yeah. And it may be you or she said that, concert pianist, marathoner in your 90s. People were impressed by the marathoning. She said, "I'll assure you, being a concert pianist is way harder."
Yeah. I was a little mystified by that. But one thing she did link was the discipline it requires to put a performance together on the piano is probably one of the things that helped her with the discipline of running. And but she was always active throughout her life.
I saw her play well into her 80s. And goodness gracious, she could rock that piano.
Yeah, I remember Carlisle Marney had a child who studied under Mom. Mom was a piano teacher as well as a performer. And when someone was asking about if he knew Harriet Thompson played the piano, he said, "She didn't just play the piano; she beats the hell out of it." Doesn't that sound like Marnie?
There's a physicality to it. You just read these stories about, Chopin and people like that. They would break the piano in their concerts. It's always amazing. So you've had a life as a pastor, and you've retired now as a military chaplain also. Yeah,
right. I retired from the military in December of 2015.
You went to Afghanistan, didn't you?
Yeah, I was in Iraq and Afghanistan, mobilized active duty. Most of my time was spent as reservist, where I was juggling both the chaplaincy and the parish. And I found that despite the fact that there is occasional absences from the parish, I think my chaplaincy really enhanced my parish work in terms of exposure to a lot of different traditions, a lot of different people, some of whom identified as believers, some of whom had no belief. And I think we need more and more to be in connection with people beyond ourselves, beyond
And
just
in a whole another different part of the world. Goodness.
yeah. Oh yeah.
So our topic for this weekly event here is, what in the Bible has been mattering to you lately and why? So what would you say about that?
Well, when you invited me to join you today, I was thinking, wow, where to go? I mean, there's so much richness there. But I've been reading a book recently called "The Bible is Dream" by oops, let me get this straight. It's all mirror image. But anyway, "The Bible is Dream: A Jungian Interpretation" by Murray Stein.
Wow.
Isn't this weird? And he basically takes a psychological interpretation to the scriptures, and one of the things that I think some people might find that a little threatening, as reductionistic, kind of thing. But one of the things that he says, and those of Jungian bent often say, is that they're not contesting any truth claims in the Bible, but they're just speaking about how we experience the God image in the psyche, in the soul. And so it's an attempt to be empirical, relies a lot on dreams, and he looks at the Bible then as communicating the evolution of the God image, not so much necessarily as it relates to God as he is or she is in her transcendence, or what he would say archetypally, but as we experience God. So there's an evolution, and he talks about this in terms of a Jungian term called individuation, that our understanding of ourselves and of God develops over time, and that's true for community as well. That our understanding of God develops and evolves over time. And so as I looked at this book, he spends some time introducing, the psychological approach, and then he goes into it's not a very thick book, but it goes into some detail of tracing that, beginning with Genesis, and then moving on into the New Testament, and but he reserves a second part of his book for the Gospel of John, which he claims is a little different than the other Gospels. Which, of course, when we look at it, we see the human elements in the Synoptic Gospels as being very prominent. But in the Gospel of John, we have sort of a different approach to Jesus, where the divine aspect of Jesus seems to be stressed.
And it's rich with imagery. God is light, God
symbols,
all these things. Yeah.
And he focuses on three themes. I thought I might just try to introduce those three themes and see what you think. The first is the Logos, which begins the book. The second is light, which of course contrasts with darkness, which is very prominent in John. And then finally, way is the last theme. So maybe we can just touch a little bit on each of those.
Yeah.
I'm interested in Logos, partly because I've read Richard Rohr's Universal Christ, probably you're familiar with.
Yeah.
Which, and I remember in my chaplaincy how when I encountered a chaplain who had put great emphasis on the historical Jesus and believing in the historical Jesus, the man Jesus. I found myself thinking of John and thinking of the Logos, and realizing that it's not just that the Logos is not just incarnate in the person of Jesus, but as Richard Rohr says that, it's and as the Logos in John testifies, it's incarnate in creation. The Logos.
In the beginning was the
Yes.
Logos. In the beginning
Yeah.
was the Word. The Word was with God.
Yeah.
All things were made through. Yeah.
Yeah. So Rohr talks about Logos as, and he talks about creation as the first revelation. And I think that's really healthy, especially when we're in dialogue with other traditions, to realize that whatever we're talking about, whatever mystery this is that we're talking about, is not just our possession, but it's Rohr even has this unusual take on communion, which we often look at as, and outsiders often look at, I've learned, as being this magical thing that transforms the wine and the bread into something that it wasn't before, which is, I don't argue that there is something transformative about that experience, but what the way Rohr talks about it is that it helps us to see this bread and this wine and whatever transformation we're going through. It helps us to see that is all around us. That incarnational aspect of Christ taking shape in these elements is sort of a lens by which we can view all of creation and those with whom we are in relationship with. So I've appreciated that. And there's another aspect to this that Murray Stein talks about, is the relationship of this concept, Logos, how it had roots in the ancient world, but the way John uses it is there's something new there as well. And Stein talks about how that is how a term like Logos, the way that it's used in John, is very much like the way psychology uses the term archetype.
Yeah.
And the basic idea with an archetype is that it's that underneath our consciousness there is a structured unconscious. It's not just the depository for all of what we've repressed and all of which we would rather not see about ourselves. It's also there are structures, there's an archetypal structure to the unconscious. And Joseph Campbell helped me with that when he used a simple analogy once, or illustration, of how when a guinea hen is born, before it's had any contact with a parent, if you pass the shadow of its predator, this natural predator, over it, it runs for cover. If you reverse, this is an experiment they did. If you it's the cutout of the predator that is passed over it, and the shadow passes over the chick, and it runs for cover. If you reverse the predator's flight, it doesn't run for cover. The chick doesn't run for cover. There's something innate in that chick called, some anthropologists call it, an innate releasing mechanism that is not just in the animal kingdom. We often want to separate ourselves from animals, but it's within ourselves as well. We are born looking for the mother's breast. I just had an example of that with my 6-month-old granddaughter being born. And I was actually there. And I was the first one to hold her. She was born by cesarean section. And
God made us and everybody and all creatures that way.
Yeah, yeah. And so this archetypal aspect of the Logos is what he looks to, and he says that somewhere beyond there's a paradox in Jesus that in John he comes across as one with the Father. It's sort of the paradox of the Trinity, I guess you could say. He's one with the Father. The Father and I are one, but he's also the Son. And as the Son, there recognize that there is a archetype, a logos presence that is beyond the human image and the incarnate form of Jesus. Or makes that distinction by talking about Jesus and the Christ are not can't be identified. That Christ is not Jesus's last name.
No.
The Christ is the eternal second person of the Trinity. Jesus was the incarnate form, and it implies also, at least for Stein, and I think it's true, that there's something more to be revealed. When you say that he is that there is this archetype that lies behind the person of Jesus, maybe there's something more to be revealed, which some people might struggle with, but I think
you hope so.
Yeah, it's our hope, right? And it happens in Jesus' life. I mean, when he is departing from the earth, he promises the Paraclete, he promises the Comforter. There's something more to be revealed. And the key verse that Stein focuses on, which I think is an interesting. I've heard others use the same verse in 1:14, and that is that the Word was made flesh, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen His glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. And there are revelations of glory in the book of John, throughout the book of John. And it's not just the signs, not just the book of signs that Raymond Brown identified with the earlier chapters, but it's that that second section, the book of glory, where you have key episodes like the foot washing of Jesus, where he washes the feet of his disciples. This is what glory looks like.
Ultimately, on the cross, John
exactly.
read this somewhere years ago and thought about it. For John's gospel, Jesus is most glorified in the moment of his crucifixion. Like we think, oh, that's the shame, that's the heart. No, that exactly. The curtain is pulled back. That is the glory of God.
And I amen. And I don't want to get too far afield, but that was what helped me as I was moving out of law school and pursuing this call to ministry that must have been ingrained in me somewhere in the Myers Park environment. Bob Tuttle and many loving people like Nancy Akers and others who the Bukers who just love me unconditionally. That I was in law school and struggling with this feeling of, well, maybe this whole religion business is just a lonely hearts club. Maybe we just come together because we need to be reassured. Did it have anything to do beyond my emotional need? Whatever I was deprived of as a child, And I actually had a vision. I had a vision in the parking lot. It was at night, and it was I saw Jesus on the cross, and I realized at that moment that was an expression of love for me, and that was eternal. It was not, I've heard a preacher talk about how if you go out far enough in space and look back at Earth, you can see the light that was there emanating, and you could see that event if you go out far enough. 2,000 light years, that event is happening. There's an eternity that is revealed. And yeah, that was that was, when he talked about key episodes of foot washing, and the true vine, and friendship as being an example of glory, and then the passion. And he comes to the conclusion that God can be understood as loving service. That's what's revealed. That's the glory. Loving service is revealed in that.
And how to put it, solidarity with us in everything, right? So we talked about all of creation, all of people, but even everything. So that the glorification of God in the cross. I think about Rick Lisher, who he taught preaching shortly after you and I were in seminary, and his young son Adam died in his 20s, and Rick narrated that process. And he said when they first got this terrible diagnosis, they left the Duke Medical Center and they just found the first church that they came upon. It happened to be a Catholic church, and they stuck their head in the door and they looked up at the front, and there was not just a cross, but a crucifix. And Rick said, this must be the right place. This is a place that is not freaked out by death.
Right.
Like, I love that. I mean, so that's the heart of God. It isn't like fun, sunny, happy things where we're comfortable. Right. It's everything.
Yeah, and he goes into this more in that's the same notion in terms of when he talks about Jesus as light, and maybe that's a good time for us to move to that theme. But this God is loving service. Some people can look at the cross like Nietzsche did, and say this is morbid, and he was much more attracted to the Greek gods that were powerful, and Stein actually says that's a regression. That there is indeed the potential for masochism and that kind of thing, but I'll just quote briefly what he says here. At its best and healthiest, the expression of this archetypal constellation in life presents us with a person who is able to put others ahead of his or her own needs when necessary, who is able to be generous and to share, who has mastered narcissism and envy for the sake of relationship, and who is directed by a purpose that Erik Erikson named generativity. Jung spoke of as the constellation of the transcendent function. And that's a term, that's a technical term where Jung is talking about a psychic structure that allows for a certain amount of detachment from the ego and from egoistic claims and identifications. So part of what Stein's talking about is this evolution from king, and it's a slow evolution to king, but he in Jesus' day, that was perhaps one of the prevalent images of God as king. And it basically reverses that, turns it on its head, and to suffering servant, and again, there's this call for us to, and what you were talking about before, this solidarity, that Jesus isn't just calling us out to be organized activists. that beautiful musical by Harry Chapin. We got to get organized. We got to get tough. Ministry can devolve into that so easily. And but that there is something that Jesus' relationship with the Father, and this is emphasized throughout the gospel. They are one. Is one that we are invited into, and one that it parallels. He basically says that Jesus' relationship with the Father is a psychological merger and a union, and we're called to have that relationship with Jesus and the Trinity. in many ways, you can look at John as being the most inward of the Gospels.
Absolutely.
And it invites us, and this is something that's become interesting to me, this contemplative tradition in Christianity. And that invites us into a relationship that is so intimate that it's hard to describe, and that we can, but one that is to be explored, and one that, in many ways, I think, at least in my experience growing up, was not emphasized. It was more about this cognitive belief, and then he talks about how intimate this is with Jesus. It's not just a pat on the back kind of friendship. The description, his gestures, his body language convey an atmosphere of erotic intimacy that is striking. I thought that was pretty strong. And what he's talking about is a pre-Oedipal kind of eroticism here. He's talking about the eroticism of a maternal link, the kind of, when I see my granddaughter looking at the face of her mother, and even when I see her looking at my face, and the love that is passing between us, it is intimate, and there's a psychological, there's this whole psychology about that mirroring of love. That's how we learn who we are. And in a sense, that's what's happening in John. We are so called to a relationship with Jesus and Jesus alone that he imprints himself on us. We are imprinted by that image.
Yeah, and I've been trying to talk lately about stillness, and we get confused that all of life is about doing something and being productive. And so then religion is you're doing something, you're being productive. But really the most beautiful moments in life that matter the most to us are the kind of thing you just described. If I could do anything with my children again, it wouldn't be something we did. It would be those times when, like, I just held my infant and we just together.
Right.
The beauty of seeing that intimacy is just so lovely.
And that's the that's the balance. Jung talks a lot about opposites, how consciousness creates opposites, and yet the transcendent function is what unites those opposites. And so we see here the logos, in a sense, united with the eros here. It's not just word, but there's eros there. And it comes together in the person of Jesus. And then ironically, where this is one of the places where this is exemplifies in the Last Supper, in the midst of the love feast, the devil makes an appearance right in the midst of it. And in the form of betrayal, which is deeply disturbing when it's a relationship is built on bonds of trust. And you have this image of John, the beloved disciple, leaning into Jesus' breast, talking about erotic. And then and Raymond Brown thinks it was Judas on the other side, honored position of treasurer. And what Stein talks about here is the essential role that darkness plays in this unfolding of the God image. It's all planned. It's following and it's following a pattern of meaning that you find in the Old Testament as well, with Moses demanding of Pharaoh to let my people go. Pharaoh played an important part in showing the redemptive power of God in the Exodus. Judas does the same here, and it's a little bit disturbing at times to think about. Some people even see it as a kind of dualism that Judas plays such an important part. Darkness is so prevalent, but it's in one sense the darkness that is key to our for the light, to the fullness of the light to be exposed.
And the beauty, I wrote a piece that wasn't all that brilliant one time for Christian Century about Persian carpets. I just had bought a couple of Persian carpets, and Persian carpets are beautiful, not because, they're all bright red and orange. They have bright red and orange, but then they also have very dark hues that are woven in. This is like our experience of God, our experience of life. And it's all that together that creates the deeper, more profound beauty that is our life with God.
Right. And this is one of the reasons why Jungian psychology emphasizes encounter with the shadow. The shadow can contain elements that can be brought out into consciousness and enhance our lives. But this dualism, Stein talks about as being especially prevalent when you have an emerging consciousness. And I think of my kids again. Don't walk out in the street. Bad. Emerging consciousness requires some level of dualism that later you might be able to soften as you grow older. But the thing about John is that it's a stark dualism, and it requires a focus and a commitment to the light that you see in the Nicodemus story, for instance, where he comes in and he's interested in what he's seeing and Jesus do and these signs. He recognizes God must be at work, but he's pretty established, right? Just in his position as a Pharisee, and so he comes by night, and he and Jesus end up talking on different levels, it's this sense of giving yourself completely over that is so hard. Just a complete devotion. That was one of the things that attracted me to St. Francis, his just willingness to give himself completely in love. And you could see some hesitancy, and that just reminds me so much of myself. I've got all this, these genes you've been talking about, all this education, and it reminds me of the 12 steps and being powerless over alcohol, or am I really powerless? But it comes down to that, doesn't it? And if you can't accept that, then Jesus challenges us here in the Gospel of John.
If we can't accept it, we're always keeping him and others and the world at arm's distance, right? Unwittingly, but it's a fear, it's an insecurity that does that. Sydnor, I could talk to you all day about all this. This has been great. And I know you said you got stuff on.
Oh, the way. Let me just say.
Let me ask you if I can come back to you, because we have time constraints another time.
Yeah.
And look at those. We're going to be looking at the book of Acts later. And I think that way thing especially would be a beautiful thing for us to ponder, because that's what they call the early church. They don't call it the church. They talk about the way, followers of the way. So that's super interesting.
Pardon me for being so verbose, but I look forward to coming back.
Yeah. I will. I'll reach back to you for that. But this has been really thoughtful and wise. And Sydnor, I'm grateful, and I know our people are grateful and have been blessed by this time today.
I want to thank you and thank the congregation, because I think of the congregation as embodying not only those currently attending, but all those who've come before and all those who are coming after, and how well I've been loved. So thank you for that.
You and me both. So I get it. All right, Sydnor. Thank you.